Good morning. Welcome to the National Institute for Occupational Health's COVID-19 information session. This session is one of many, but will focus particularly on the question of biorisks, and let me just get the proper title, BioRisk Assessment for security officers and cleaning staff on the 23rd of March 2020. You are joining us on the Zoom platform, and for the purpose of Zoom, we cannot engage you in a two-way audio conversation, and therefore all of your links have in fact been muted. You are encouraged to use the chat box. There's a bubble at the bottom of the screen. If you click that bubble, that's the bubble in which you can type, firstly, your email addresses, name and organization that you are from, so that we can have a register of our Zoom attendance. And secondly, you can use that chat bubble at the bottom to type any questions you have with regard to the presentations my colleagues are going to give you from front, and you'll also be able to see the actual presentation slides on your screens. If you're in a very large room with keeping the social distance of the minimum space, please ensure that a physical attendance register is done in your room, and you must please send that attendance register for your room to info@nioh.ac.za. That is info@nioh.ac.za. We require a full attendance register of those who have individually logged on to Zoom and those who are in a sort of video seminar room to have a physical register, which you must please email to info@nioh.ac.za. To this particular program, a COVID-19 training session of the National Institute for Occupational Health, the NIOH, on BioRisk Assessment for security officers and cleaning staff on the 23rd of March 2020. Our program is, after you've registered in the chat box and physically in an attendance register in your different rooms, my job is to welcome you to this particular session. So before I give you an idea of what the program entails, can I just, Glenn, have the slides to give you a sense of the organization bringing you this Zoom webinar, this Zoom online information session. The first slide you will see is of the National Health Laboratory Services, of which the NIH is a division, right? So if you can just maximize that slide, I see on the screen here all the small, thank you very much, Glenn. So the National Institute for Occupational Health is a specialized division of the National Health Laboratory Services, the NHLS. We are a sister division of the NICD, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, whose leading matters on the laboratory and clinical aspects of COVID-19 and epidemiological guidance, especially for the National Board of Health and the Minister. Our task as the National Institute for Occupational Health is to deal with workplace preparedness and prevention, and essentially the hierarchy of containment via the workplace channel into broader society, etc. What you'll see on the slide is that the NHLS is the largest diagnostic pathology service in South Africa. Secondly, we provide lab and related public health services to more than 80% of the South African population, particularly those who access public health institutions. We support national and provincial health departments, and that is in all 9 provinces, and have 6 offices in 6 regions that serve those 9 provinces. We have, and I just need to see, 7,515 employees, that's 0.4 in the top right-hand corner, employees in the National Health Laboratory Service, the NHLS, and a component of those are the NIOH occupational health specialists from whom you also hear today. Then also we have 356 laboratories at both tertiary, secondary and primary facilities in approximately 260 sites across all of the 9 provinces. It is a significant public health infrastructure that is under the auspices of the National Department of Health, housed by the National Health Laboratory Services. We at the NIH deal specifically with occupational health aspects of all of this. Number 6, we have the capacity for over 30,000 diagnostic tests through this public health resource, this national public health resource, of which we do the occupational health services. And that's in addition to the private laboratories. And then finally, a very important fact for you to know is that the NICD, our sister institute, is leading on the question around, as I said, clinical and laboratory testing services. They are the ones who confirm a positive COVID-19 diagnosis after even private labs have done that. And then the minister would make a pronouncement with regard to the case numbers, and then the NICD would release data on their own website. And then finally, I think an important one, number 8. We, the National Institute for Occupational Health, deal with the occupational health responses for COVID-19. I will soon introduce you to the chairperson of the NIH's COVID-19 outbreak response team, Dr. Tanusha Singh, who's leading all the activities here, including this particular Zoom session, another Zoom session from the NIH dealing with workplace preparedness and prevention. Our second slide, which we will be moving to, deals with a bit more detail as part of the introduction, important for you to know. I'm not sure, can people indicate if they can still see the slides? I'm looking at a test screen in front of me, and I'm not sure if you can see this particular slide. Can we check on the text? I can't see the text. Actually, let me just check your laptop. No. Because on your laptop is also not showing it. Yeah. Can we just check on that, Glenn? Okay, so the next slide you'll soon be seeing after me giving you a sense of the role of the National Health Laboratory Services and our particular relationship and the relationship of our sister institute, the NIH and the NICD, within the umbrella organization of the NHRS. I need to give you a sense around the NIH's specific services. For those who are online now, let me just use this opportunity. Please, at the bottom of your screen, go to the chat box and click the chat box bubble. Please register by giving your name, surname, email address, and organization and position. We want to share with you the information that we would be sending out as resources to you after the session. The slide you have on the screen now is indicating the NIH specialized services that we offer. In addition to outbreak response, and you are now watching one of the outbreak response activities, this Zoom webinar, we provide advisory services, and that is from a large range of sections, from occupational medicine, immunology, and microbiology, toxicology, immunology, did I say that? Pathology, occupational hygiene, epidemiology, and I hope I'm not missing out on any of the specialized sections where advisory services are provided, and analytical services for organic and inorganic chemistry. We are key to knowledge generation in the area of occupational health, developing guidelines, protocols, and materials to help in strengthening systems within the workplace. And then finally, again, as part of teaching and training, this is one of the methods, including the Zoom session, that have now recently emerged in our toolbox. If you need to find out any more about our services, please visit our website, the NIH, www.nih.ac.za, and email us at info@nih.ac.za. That's it for the introduction to our organization. I now have the pleasure of welcoming, for introduction purposes, the chairperson of the NIOH Outbreak Response Team, and we will have our projection. There you are. Thank you very much. I need to welcome the chairperson of that, Dr. Talusha Singh. Thank you. Talusha is also leading today's team around the BioRisk Assessment. Thank you, Talusha.
Thanks, Ashwin. Greetings, colleagues. I'm just waiting for the slides to come up. But in the interim, today's session essentially is slightly different from our previous information sharing and training sessions, in the sense that we're going to provide a little bit stats and projections around COVID and the spread of the virus, and then look specifically at risk assessment for two occupational groups, that's the security officers as well as our cleaning personnel. So I'm just appealing to everyone that to exercise some patience with us, because it's difficult to pitch the information, as some of you may already know some information, you've been part of our series already, but for the newcomers, we have some basic information that we are sharing. For those of you that want any additional information around the virus, please log on to our website. The details are on the screen, and our program director will share it at the end. So on the website, you'll get much more information around the COVID virus. Okay, so I just want to take you back to a month ago, the 19th of February precisely, just to give you a sense of where the outbreak was back then. Globally, we had 75,204 cases, and we had 2,009 deaths. And the virus had by then spread to 25 countries worldwide. And if you look at the map, you'll see that Africa was pretty much gray with only one red dot in Egypt, and they had by then about 1 or 2 cases. Moving along a month later, the virus had spread incredibly, and we're now sitting with globally 335,377 cases and 14,611 deaths, and it has spread across 192 countries. That is over 260 cases, 12,000 deaths, and 167 countries that in terms of an increase in the number of cases. And this is a significant number. And why is that important to us? If we understand and appreciate the risk of COVID, only then can we anticipate the risk for our workplaces, and then look at the mitigation strategies in terms of controlling and containing the virus. So now moving a little bit closer to home, in South Africa, this information is widely available in the public domain, and it was put together by the Mail and Guardian, and the statistics came from many reputable sources like the World Health Organization, SA Health, and the Health Systems Trust. But essentially what I wanted to show you is that from the 5th of March, when South Africa had its first case, until the 12th of March, we had 17 cases. And if you look on the map, by the projection, the better case scenario projection was 58 cases by the 21st of March. We are now sitting on 274 cases, and it's the 20th by yesterday, the 22nd of March. So that tells us, in terms of the best case scenario, looking at the possible outcome for South Africa, if we can match the current March the 12th world average daily infection growth rate of 13%, that would be the projection on the blue bars that you see on the screen. The worst case scenario would be to look at the possible outcome for South Africa at our current March the 12th average daily infection growth rate of 57%. And you can see that the numbers are very high in comparison. So the one challenge that we're currently facing in South Africa is our health care capacity. With only 144.8 professional nurses per 100,000 of the population, 32 medical practitioners per 100,000 of the population, and 17.9 bed density per 10,000 of uninsured population, we're sitting with a major problem. So it's vitally important that us within the workspace try by all means to be able to put in preventative measures to contain the spread of the virus. This is another estimate of the coronavirus, of corona cases in SA by April the 1st, and the projections were done by the South African Centre for Epidemiological Modelling and Analysis. And they looked at both a 50% and a 95% chance of cumulative number of identified cases on March the 20th and April the 1st. And you can see again, if you look at the range for March the 20th, which is the lowest blue bar on your screen, the range is between 132 to 245 cases. And we're currently sitting on 274 cases for that period. So the risk to the country is significant. And that was some of the information that had informed the president in terms of the state of disaster. Now this slide that I want to show you is looking at the ranking of the global pandemic preparedness that was done, and it looked at 6 different categories. Prevention, rapid response, detection and reporting, health systems, and the risk environment, as well as compliance and global compliance with global norms. If you look at the circles on the graph and the different countries, you would see that the USA on the top ranked first in terms of their preparedness for a pandemic. Prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, China had a plan in place to deal with communicable diseases with pandemic potential. Now, if you go across the graph to the end, you look at the South African map, you would see that we're ranking around 54 point, that's our score, our ranking is 54.2 or 3, and that shows us that our capacity to deal with the pandemic. So we're sitting with a crisis. If you look at the comparison to countries like Iran and Italy, who has not managed to contain the outbreak. So again, these are some of the information or statistics that had informed the president, aside from many others. But the message that I want to get across is to say that this is a real challenge, and it's a challenge for workplaces, employers and employees to put their minds together to deal with preventative measures. And today, the occupational groups that we are going to be focusing on, the cleaning personnel and the security personnel plays an important role in terms of environmental cleanliness and access to our facilities, in terms of containing the contamination that comes through our doors. But more importantly, also to ensure that in terms of their role, that they are also, their health is also taken care of and they are protected. So in terms of flattening those curves or those numbers that I showed you in the previous slides, there are some things we can do. If we do nothing, if you look at the first graph on the top, the blue graph, you will see that the graph will remain quite high. But if we do, and some of the precautionary measures, the standard precautionary measures that were shared with us in terms of washing our hands effectively, social distancing, as well as staying at home when we are sick, then we can flatten the curve to some extent. But to stop the spread of the virus, we need to do a lot more. We need to have a collaborative and a collective response in terms of dealing with preventative measures in the workplace. So let's look at transmission. The virus is spread, as we know, through direct contact, touching an ill person or contaminated surface, or through droplet transmission, and that is inhaling the droplets. And the risk zone is within 1 to 2 meters of an infected person, or the danger zone within 4 meters of where these droplets can settle. From a cleaning perspective, we need to think about that danger zone. So we know that the droplets are spread or generated to coughing and sneezing. On average, the incubation period for the COVID infection is 5.2 days, and this can be up to 27 days. And this is the number that speaks to the 14-day quarantine that has been shared by our health authorities. Generally, if you are asymptomatic, you're not infectious during the incubation period, and you are said to be more infectious when the symptoms start to show, like the coughing and sneezing, because then you're generating these droplets that are infected with the virus. Now, there's another number that you may come across, and it's called the basic reproductive number. And that number tells us how many people are likely to get infected through one infectious source. If you look at the bottom right of your screen, you will see that for measles, it is the most infectious biological agent, and it is able to infect 16 other people from one infectious source. Whereas if we look at COVID, in the middle row, on the extreme left-hand side, the reproductive number is 2.5. That tells us that for every individual that is infected, they are likely to spread the infectious source to 2.5 other people. I want to just pause for a while because I see the test screen has gone off, and I just want to confirm with our IT person if everybody can see. Are we good, Glenn? Okay. So now, how long does the virus persist in the environment? That's a critical question from it, especially for cleaning our environmental surfaces. The virus, as we know, it has a fragile outer membrane. It is less stable in environments and can be killed by simple disinfectants that we use in our house, everyday disinfectants, as long as they have some of the active ingredients like chlorine and ammonia. Common disinfectants should also have your 70% alcohol, or bleach can also kill the virus quite effectively. There is no evidence to date. Just a technical glitch, we're working on it. If you can hear me.
I think I can see it.
Okay. Glenn, can we have an indication? Can I continue? Okay, we got the thumbs up to proceed. Apologies for that. So currently there's no evidence to date on its survival in water or sewage. Based on its structure, it probably does not survive for long in these mediums. And we are uncertain of how long the virus survives on surfaces. However, there are studies that have shown that it can survive from anything between 12 hours to 9 days. However, this survival time depends on the environmental conditions, such as the pH, the inoculant size, the dryness in the air in terms of humidity, the temperature, as well as the exposure time to disinfectants. And the type of surface is also important. Whether it is on metal surfaces, if it's on steel, copper, or material fabrics. So in terms of the infections, it is said that approximately 80% of the population that may become infected presents with mild symptoms. 15% are severe cases, approximately 5% are critical cases, and approximately 2.3% of the cases that gets infected succumb to the viral infection. Some of the common symptoms include sore throats, cough, headaches, high fever, and shortness of breath. Now, in terms of the case definition, if you present with these common symptoms and in the last 14 days of the onset of these symptoms meet at least one of the following epidemiological criteria, then you may be meeting the case definition. So the question you may be asking or have asked yourself, I think I may have COVID, what should I do now? So I'm just going to give you some guidelines that is available from the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in terms of the steps to take. So you're presenting with the common symptoms and you may have been in contact face-to-face with a laboratory confirmed case that is within 2 meters of that case, or you may have been admitted with severe pneumonia of unknown etiology, or a health worker or other person providing care while not wearing recommended PPE. You may have visited a health facility where COVID-19 case was being treated. The other possibility may be travel, that you may have traveled to high-risk areas where there is local transmission of COVID-19, or you may have been sitting on the plane or on the bus within 2 meters of a potential case. So, if you do not meet these criteria, these epidemiological criteria, but you have symptoms, then there may be other etiologies that needs to be excluded. And so if you could then request a respiratory panel, which includes influenza or RSV, or if you have excluded those and you still are unsure, you can then contact the NICD hotline, where testing may be indicated for COVID. Now, if you answered yes to the above, then testing for COVID is indicated. What are the steps to follow if that is the case? Well, the first thing you'll do is you'll contact NICD. They will expect you to complete through the health official some forms, so you may have to provide some information, and you may you have to provide them with the number of contacts that you may have come into contact with. Two specimens will be collected according to the NICD guidelines, and the case will be notified to the notifiable medical conditions system. Then these specimens will be sent to the NICD together with your documents, and your test will be performed. And if you get the result and the result is negative, then everything may be okay, and you just may need to be reassessed to ensure that you have not further developed any symptoms. And then if you have developed symptoms, you will then contact the NICD hotline and the cycle will continue again. If you test positive, you will be admitted to the hospital, or you may be requested to self-isolate. And sequential swabbing will be done until you test negative. And if you test negative, then you will be cleared or you will be discharged from the hospital. If you test positive, you will remain within isolation until you test positive again. During that process of your admission or self-isolation, the health officials will initiate contact tracing. You will be monitored for your symptoms for 14 days post-exposure, and then your contacts will be evaluated. There are 2 types of contacts. There is close contacts and casual contacts. I'll talk first to the casual contacts. If you are a casual contact, you will need to avoid non-essential contact. You will self-monitor yourself, and within the 14 days, if you remain asymptomatic, then your monitoring is stopped. However, within the 14 days, if you present with symptoms, then you become a symptomatic contact and will need to go contact the NICD. The next type of contact is your close contact. You will be requested by the health officials to home quarantine. The NICD or CDC will issue you with a letter, and then you will do daily, they will do daily telephonic monitoring, and you will need to monitor for symptoms, take your temperature, as well as record any symptoms on the forms they provide you. Again, you will then monitor yourself. If you remain asymptomatic, monitoring will stop. If you present with symptoms, then you will be subjected to further testing. So in a nutshell, that's the process to follow if you suspect that you may have COVID-19 symptoms. How is COVID diagnosed? Well, currently only persons who are persons under investigation that meets the epidemiological case definition will be tested. All cases need to be discussed with the NICD doctor on call before collecting samples. The cost for these tests through the NICD is free, and for specific guidance, you can contact the number or the website that is presented on the screen. The test will only be positive if the person has active disease, which may vary from mild to severe symptoms. The test does not identify persons who are incubating the infection, and for now, the turnaround time is approximately 48 hours from the time the specimen reaches the laboratory. Asymptomatic persons who are not tested, that's the guideline at the moment. No testing is done on asymptomatic persons, and testing is only done. Testing is not done to determine exposure or to give the all clear to workplaces. A number of queries come to say that we have a potential person, can you clear them so that they're safe to come to work? The NSAID will not be doing those type of tests. So let's move to the workplace. In terms of the workplace, there are two potential sources that COVID-19 virus can come through. The first is through a community acquired, that is from visitors or contractors coming into the workplace that may be positive, or if you have an employee that may have contracted COVID-19 in the community and comes into the workplace. The other way is through work acquired, that is through the direct functions that you conduct during your work activities, and you acquire the infection or may be exposed. Which workplaces are affected? Any workplace may be affected from exposure to COVID. It ranges from healthcare facilities, schools, factories, office environments, emergency medical services, high population density work areas like labor centers, call centers. Literally any workplace can potentially have COVID in their work area. And which persons could be affected? Again, any person may be affected, from the cleaning staff, support staff, right through to senior management. Anyone can be affected. Visitors, contractors coming onto your premises may also be affected. Which occupations are considered high-risk occupations? Currently, there are a number of high-risk occupations, including healthcare workers, laboratory workers, morgue and mortuary workers, airline operators, border control, and medical transport workers. Some workers may be at risk. These include workers that are immunocompromised, asthma, diabetes, and heart disease. So it is important that we take all this into consideration when considering preventative measures in the workplace. The first step to do is why we are here today, and that is to conduct a risk assessment that is job function specific. And you will see when the next presenter does their talk, why is it important to do a risk assessment that is job function specific. Now, we are governed by a number of legislators, and they range from the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Regulations for Hazardous Biological Act, and a number of others on your screen. And so we need to comply with these legislations in the workplace, and we have seen that the Department of Health has put together a standard operating procedure on the preparedness, detection, and response to the coronavirus, and this is available on the NIOH website. We also have the Department of Labor through the compensation that has sent out a notice on COVID-19, and it is recognized as a occupationally acquired disease. Just a technical glitch. I'm waiting for my next slide to come up. So So let's get back to basics. In anticipation of this risk, having seen the global number of cases and the South African number of cases, we need to conduct a risk assessment to determine the risk of exposure, and this needs to also consider other hazards in the workplace, like physical, chemical, ergonomic risks, as well as psychosocial issues that affect workers during this COVID-19 outbreak. The risk assessment must be communicated to all workers, and you need to take into consideration the host, the virus, and the environment, which my colleague will talk to you in more detail. Now, in terms of the risk evaluation and the process of risk assessment, there are a number of examples, and there is no standardized template that can be used. These can be tailored to different organizations depending on their preference of ease. But essentially what you're looking for is, what is the consequence of the disease, what is the frequency of exposure, and the likelihood of the risk. In terms of the actions that need to be taken based on the risk, whether it is a qualitative score you give or a quantitative score, that priority needs to be taken into consideration with other factors, like the urgency of your interventions, the feasibility and sustainability of the risk control measures, the delivery and installation time and training that is available. So in terms of mitigation, there's a number of approaches. We tend to look at a tiered approach, looking at primary prevention, where we want to minimize the risk of transmission by implementing a hierarchy of controls, like your engineering, administrative, and PPE, business continuity and pandemic preparedness through your policies, your plans and procedures. Education and training or health promotion in terms of risk communication is fundamental. And then in terms of secondary prevention, to identify persons at risk early and respond appropriately, and to do medical surveillance if your risk assessment informs you to do so. Tertiary prevention, looking at rehabilitation, respond appropriately to a case of COVID amongst your staff, do instant investigation and contact tracing, and then look at issues of leave and compensation. So in terms of the hierarchy of controls for coronavirus, it may be difficult to look at elimination or substitution, so you rely on the administrative approach, looking at the policies, health promotion and training. But most important on this slide is the issue of behavior. This is having the right attitude with the appropriate training contributes significantly to controlling transmission, and that includes coronavirus. The other issue is engineering controls to reduce exposure without relying on the worker behavior, and this sometimes can be cost effective, but this needs to be determined through your mitigation strategy. And lastly, to look at PPE, which we're going to have a number of demonstrations today in terms of what can be available to the two occupational groups we are talking about. In terms of examples of engineering controls, you could look at ventilation, you could look at installing physical barriers to limit the number of people or interaction with people. Surface cleaning devices may be recommended depending on the type of activity you are conducting in your workspace. In terms of administrative controls, you can look at enhancing awareness training, SOPs, and important as well is to foster a blame-free working environment to avoid stigma in the workplace, and then establish and ensure access to employee assistance programs. In terms of policies, it's important to have the occupational health policies. You may now have an access control method in terms of limiting the number of people coming into your workplace. That reduces the risk to both the security as well as reduces the risk to the cleaning staff, because there's less contamination that may come into the workspace. Then reporting on sick leave or special leave, etc., and then medical management procedures to address COVID-19. In terms of some of the general occupational health practices that you need to review in light of the pronouncement by the President, and I know there is the President is going to be speaking to the nation today, and so we'll hear what are the further advancements that we need to take into consideration. But for now, limiting mass gatherings, reducing waiting times in certain areas, like your clinics, your labor centers, and communal areas as well. Specific procedures where it applies, like spirometry, breathalyzers, to have a policy on these measures. Then access control, as I mentioned, regarding signing in or biometrics, and then maintaining the social distancing of 1 meter to 2 meters, and that reduces to a large extent contamination within the workspace. And then insist that symptomatic persons stay away or self-isolate. So in terms of reducing the curve, we mentioned that there are a number of general precautions to be observed. The one is washing your hands, cleaning and disinfecting touch surfaces, then staying away, coughing or sneezing into a tissue, and if you don't have a tissue, into the elbow. Then trying not to touch the hands, not to touch your face, your eyes, nose, and mouth. And then the other things to take into consideration is to ensure your general health is maintained. For chronic diseases, to ensure that they're well controlled, and this helps to minimize risk to infection. Then there are no currently available vaccines for COVID-19, but it is advocated to take the flu vaccine to prevent influenza, and then unnecessary testing for COVID-19. And then we know all the travel prohibitions and restrictions within the country and internationally, but also from a work point of view, to implement some travel restrictions on local or international travel. Now, in terms of PPE, and my colleague is going to talk a lot about PPE, because for the cleaning and security personnel, there may be many different options available, but which is the right PPE to use? We don't need to use all PPE if the risk assessment doesn't warrant it. So we need to make sure that in terms of our basket of controls, what should we be using to mitigate against the risk for PPE? In some instances, we may just rely on good hand washing and the use of hand sanitizers rather than using gloves or respirators in terms of controlling risk. So these are the steps that we're going to work through in the coming session. So from myself, the take-home message is the duty of every individual, employer, employee, to adhere to the President's pronouncements. Secondly, to develop and comply with workplace policies and procedures, to have a mind shift and behavior change, to do things differently. The issue is that we are the people that is infected and is spreading the virus. As individuals, we are the only people that can stop the virus. And so we need to work on our behavior and our practices within the workspace, but also in our social environments. And a lot we can do together, as long as we think creatively, look at simple and cost-effective measures, and work together. And finally, all risk is not the same, and hence controls cannot be a one-size-fits-all. So even if we have security, we cannot have the same type of PPE applied to all security personnel, and that's the most important take-home message. You need to do a risk assessment based on job function. And thank you from my side.
Thank you very much. That's Dr. Tanusha Singh. If I could just get, apologies again, just to get my papers here, who is the head of the immunology section here, as well as the chairperson of the NIOH, the National Institute for Occupational Health's COVID-19 outbreak response team. So, our program today is the BioRisk Assessment for security officers and cleaning staff, and Tanusha has done the first session. As a reminder, before I move on to our next presenter, Ms. Anika Matuka, also from the immunology section, please, if you've joined us and you've not yet put your email address, name and surname in the chat box bubble at the bottom of the Zoom screen, please type in there your name, surname, email address, and organization position that you are, for us to have a complete register of the attendance on the Zoom platform. And where you have more than one person in a room, or you have more than one person in a large space, then with obvious social distancing spaces in between, please have a hard copy register which you sign and email that to info@nioh.ac.za. With that having been said, that very same chat box is where you please type in your questions on the presentation you just had. We will deal with questions as a panel here in front. I now have the pleasure of welcoming on the topic of BioRisk Assessment tool, Ms. Annika Matuka. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashma. Good day, everyone. I'm going to present to you BioRisk Assessment for COVID-19. That's for securities and cleaners. Okay, we first need to know what is BioRisk Assessment. BioRisk Assessment is defined as a process of determining the risk associated with exposure to a particular biological hazard, as well as evaluating existing controls that are in place and deciding if risks are acceptable or not, with the aim of protecting the health of the worker as well as the public and prevent or reduce exposure in the workplace. And this also will inform the mitigation strategies that needs to be put in place. So for definitions, what is a biological risk? It's the chance that a biological material can cause harm to the health and safety of a person. And we do get different types of biological agents, but our focus today is on viruses, as our focus is on the coronavirus. And the proximate sources can either be people or persons or even the environment. So a hazard is anything that can cause harm to the health and safety of a person. In this case, is the coronavirus. And then the risk is defined as the chance that a person will be harmed by that specific hazard. So it is important to differentiate between these two terms, because for you to put in mitigation strategies, you need to know the difference, because a hazard can not always have can harm a person if control measures are put in place. So why do we need risk assessment? The Occupational Health and Safety Act requires that any employer must make sure that they protect the health of their workers. So under the hazardous biological agent regulation, it requires that the employer protect the worker. Risk assessment is the key in preventing exposure in the workplace. So if you put together your infection control practices or strategies in place, it has to form part of that. In order to determine the risk which are associated with a specific agent, and then it must be done initially, and then it must be done every 2 years as stipulated in the hazardous biological agent regulation. And most importantly, it must be done in consultation with the Health and Safety Committee. And the regulation states that all records of risk assessment must be kept for 40 years. So I'm going to go through with you in the main pillars of risk assessment. So when you start risk assessment, the first step is to identify the hazard. So when identifying the hazard, you look at the occupation itself, you look at the activity, what the person does. As the previous speaker had said, you can have a same job title, but doing different activities. And you look at the processes as well. Then the second step after you identified your hazards is to decide who may be harmed and how will this harm occur to this person. Then you evaluate the risk there your focus should be to what extent will the harm occur? What is the likelihood of harm and what consequences will come there? Whether it will be like severe or it will be minor, it depends. And then you look at the number of exposed workers and the current control measures which you have in place, whether they are adequate or if you need to add on. And the last step is to make sure that you record your risk assessment. So by recording it, you also have to put in place the action plan. Whatever you have identified and you think should be added onto your mitigation strategies, then you put action plan in place to say who will do what and at what timeline, so that we make sure all these risks are resolved. Then this risk assessment must be reviewed periodically, because you need to see how far you have gone and how much more needs to be done, or if you have achieved what you have set to do. And the regulation says that also risk assessment must be conducted, even if it's, like I've mentioned in the previous slides, it must be done every 2 years. But it can happen that you will need to do it before the 2 years if there is any change in your work setting, or if there is any incident that happened in the workplace, or if you get complaints from the workers, or they've been affected by a certain agent, or if there is any new work that has been introduced in the workplace, then you need to review your risk assessment. So the approaches really depends on the nature of the workplace, the type of processes as mentioned, and the task performed at the time of conducting risk assessment. That should be emphasized, because when you do risk assessment, it has to be done while the worker is doing their job, so that you are able to see what actually the worker is doing and where the risk can be. Not just do it from office as other people usually do risk assessment without actually witnessing what the worker does. And lastly, there can be like some complexity when you do risk assessment because of the type of activities or the type of job. So I'm going to go through with you on how to do risk assessment in simple way. As mentioned, the first step is identifying the hazard. So that's where you will look at your agent. This system works for any other agent you want to assess. But our focus today is on the coronavirus. So in this case, the agent will be your virus, but you can get it in different sources as well, depending on the workplace. Like for security, for example, they're coming to contact with people and they welcome people. The cleaners, wherever they are sitting, it's an office environment, there are people around. And if it's a hospital environment, for example, there are also patients as well as the public that's visiting the hospital. So you want to focus on what could be your source and how you can get it. Then how you can get it, it depends on the way of transmission. But in this case, we all know by now that you can get the virus via contact, which is direct exposure. But there has been some researchers that states possibility of airborne transmission. But for now, we will not be looking at that since it hasn't been approved yet. We'll be getting updates as the COVID-19 is evolving. So the next step we said is now you decide who may be harmed. Your focus should be on your host. You look at the task on the site and you look at the duration in which the worker is exposed to that, like the shift of the security. That's some work 8 hours, some 12 hours. So that really will impact on the chances of them being exposed to the hazard. You also look at the risk factors. That will be, for example, you get different workers. You get those that are healthy, you get those who are immunocompromised. So the immunocompromised workers wouldn't respond the same way as healthy workers. They will be more affected as their immune system is already compromised. So you would like to also consider that when doing your risk assessment. Then you look at your risk occupation. As mentioned, you can get different securities, but their exposure will differ depending on the type of task they perform. So after looking at your host, now what will be the outcome of being exposed to the virus? We already know it leads to infection, which is the COVID-19. Then also just to mention, exposure can be semi-indirect through contaminated hands. That is why we are encouraged to always practice best hand hygiene, which my colleagues will be demonstrating at a later stage. Or you get indirect exposure by touching contaminated instruments or objects while doing your job. So the environment, for example, for security, it can be at the registration desk where they let people in and they let them sign. It can be the doors they are touching while opening for visitors, or even at the waiting areas in some settings where they are sitting either on the passages or at the entrance, and as well as in the bathrooms. It's important to also remember that risk assessment needs a multidisciplinary approach. Why? Because it involves different expertise. If, as a microbiologist, I'll be looking at exposure to the biological agent, the virus itself, I don't have a clue about the building, so I will need someone who specializes in that, in architecture, for example. I know nothing about ventilation if it's needed, so you'll need a ventilation engineer as well. So all those people have to be involved in the risk assessment. You need a medical doctor as well because of the health effects, who will advise on what to do when you get positive cases or infected workers. So risk assessment tools. When you do risk assessment, checklist is the first step of risk assessment. You have to have a checklist. And then you use that to identify hazards as well as preventative measures to put in place. In some instances, you'll need expert advice, especially if you don't know what to look for. And then just to emphasize again, there's no standard template for risk assessment. Each sector will have a specific one based on what they do and the procedures that are in place, but ensure that it includes all the critical information as mentioned in the previous slide. So this is just one example of the tool that you can use. You may have one already, which is slightly different, but it may, as long as it suits your facility, that's still okay, as long as you make sure that it covers the most critical information. For example, here, we said you look at the activity at hand. So example here is the security that's checking in cars at the gate. What will the hazard be? We know the hazard, we've discussed that already. And then the security officers are the people who will be affected. But if you apply it for any other job or any other group, then you will say who will be affected. And then the route is how the transmission can occur. In this case, it will be contact. That's why we are always advised not to touch our mouth, our nose, and our eyes with contaminated hands, because that's the route on how you will get the disease. And the outcome is the COVID-19 disease, which can present in different symptoms, the common symptoms, your upper respiratory tract illness, or it can be cough or headache, as has been proven by other cases that has been reported already. And then let's say for baseline controls currently, you have just trained your people and then you've provided them with hand sanitizers. But maybe you forgot, okay, you have those two, but what more can I do? Those are your residual controls. So you'll say, okay, do I really need PPE for the security? Depending on what type of job they do. Will you see at a later stage, we'll be focusing on different scenarios. That's why we will emphasize and see the differentiation of when to provide and when not to provide. And then in case you don't have procedures in place, then you say, okay, currently I don't have procedures. I have to put some procedures in place. Then these are the outstanding, or should we say, the gaps in your system. Then you have to allocate people who will look into that. That's your action plan. So you will say, who's responsible? Again, for different settings, you've allocated, either it's health and safety, or it's infection prevention and control, or it's your any other committee that you have that deals with infectious disease, then you will allocate that person. But you have to have the deadline in order to see progress in what's happening. And most importantly, you don't want to expose the worker for an extended period. The earlier you identify the risk, the better, and put control measures in place. At the end, now you have to rate your risk. Depending on what control measures you have in place and what you're running short of, that's how you would rate your risk. Whether it's unlikely to happen, whether it's like low or medium or high. So people are also different. You get people that are tolerant, you get those that are risk averse. So it will depend also. Two individuals at the same time may rate the risk differently, depending on how strict they are with putting measures in place or how relaxed they are. But in these cases, if it's in the same team, make sure you sit together, you discuss, and then you come to an amicable decision on what the risk rating should be, so that you know, you agree on what control measures to put in place. So let's move on to the hospital floor cleaning. That's a cleaner now. I've just used this as an example because that's where also patients are being admitted or checked. So it's same agent because we're dealing with one agent at the moment. But like I said, it depends on when you do other stuff, what you put in there. Who will be affected in this case is cleaners. The contact will be the same. The symptoms are just splitted, like the overall symptoms for the first three and the second three, and the last, your fever, shortness of breath, and pneumonia. That's what people are presenting with. And then for the cleaner, knowing that they are coming into contact with surfaces, you would have probably provided reusable gloves. If not disposable gloves, but mainly it's reusable gloves also for the type of job they are doing. And then you'll also provide a disinfectant for cleaning floors as well, or bathrooms and so on. And then, for example here, your residual controls may be that you just provided them with disinfectant, given them the gloves, but you haven't trained them on how to use these gloves. You haven't trained them on how to use this disinfectant, because certain disinfectants you need to dilute, so they need to know how much of the chemical to dilute with water, because that concentration is important in decontaminating the surfaces. If it's wrong, it might not kill the organism. So that's critical to train your cleaners. And you may want to also provide her with a respirator because she's working in a hospital environment. So she may be directly exposed to patients who could be infectious. Then you do the same, you apply the action plan, the supervisor of the cleaner, for example, but depending on your setup, you will know who's responsible. That person must make sure the cleaner is trained and that the cleaner have access to respirator for their protection. Then you set up the deadline also, or the timeline, then also you rate your risk. Based on what you have rated, high-risk areas or high-risk jobs must be prioritized first, followed by the rest. So when risk assessment is done, people usually do some errors. They take it as a once-off process, as I've mentioned. They will just do it in order for compliance, so that when Department of Labor or whoever does the inspection or the audit must see the document. But actually, risk assessment should be an ongoing process. As mentioned, it must be done every 2 years, and when there is any change in the work activity or work task. And it's not a paper or a tick box exercise as stated. You have to physically be there, check what the worker is doing, and decide, okay, maybe when they do this, they could be exposed to this. When they do this, they could be exposed to this. So you get a broader idea of what risk the worker could be exposed to. And then the other mistake we make is not involving the workers. The workers are the critical source of information. If you're doing a risk assessment, ask them questions, because as a person who does this assessment, you wouldn't know everything that they do. So you need to ask them. You may be seeing certain things, but that day they're probably not doing a specific step, they skipped it. So if you ask them, how do you do this on a normal daily basis? So they'll give you information, then you are able to judge for each step where they could be at risk. And then encourage them also to do reporting. If there are any risk that they have identified themselves that you may have missed during your risk assessment. Some employers or employees forget to document risk assessment. They do the risk assessment, they do their checks, but they forget to document that. It's important to document. As mentioned, the HBA regulations require the records of risk assessment, and it should be kept for 40 years. And then sometimes risk assessment is not assessed fully, probably because people don't have the knowledge of what they are dealing with, or they don't know how that organism or agent behaves, like the characteristics and so on. But in that case, if you're not sure, seek advice. There are lots of experts. Just give them a bell and then tell them what you like to be assisted with. They will be more than willing to help you. And then the preventative hierarchy sometimes is not taken into account. When you do risk assessment and decide on control measures that you need to put in place, hierarchy of controls have to be considered. As the previous speaker had shown that flow chart that include administrative controls, behavioral issues, your engineering and environmental controls, as well as PPE. Exhaust as much as you can, depending on the task at hand. And then sometimes long-term risks are underestimated or denied. So when you do risk assessment, you have to look at your organism. So far for coronavirus, like we know, it's an evolving thing, we're not sure of certain things. As research has been done, other things are discovered. So, but for agents that you know, it's easier to do that. But in this case, we may also underestimate because of the information that hasn't been at hand. But for now, we will work with whatever we know, whatever we have. So the challenges with risk assessment, Again, it's uncertainties about the virus and exposure. For example, now we have the 100 rule that only people must gather in a number of 100. But how do we know in that 100? If there is one infectious individual, how will the virus spread? We don't know that. And then again, there's lack of vaccine at the moment, so we're relying on other best practices in order to control that, and on our medical professionals to advise on what to do when we have positive cases or ill individuals. Also, the complexity can be on individuals. As individuals, we differ. I've mentioned that other people can be immunocompromised, so our susceptibility will differ, it will vary between individuals. And then also to do risk assessment when we have emerging pathogens like the current one, it's difficult because you don't know what you're dealing with. So you have to take that into consideration as well. That can be complex, but as mentioned, do with what you know and what you have. And always be alert. Make sure you get informed, you get educated or informed about the improvements on the virus or the agents that are being looked at when they are emerging ones. With the ones that we know, that's easy because we already have information in place. So things to consider. It's important to know that microorganisms are everywhere. So when it comes to mitigating, you cannot eliminate HPAs and they are invisible. So they will be there, you won't see them, but we have to make sure that we minimize the risk at each point of chain of infection, meaning that if you can stop it at the source, that will be great. But if you fail to do that, then in the next step of your environmental or your engineering controls, you can do that as well as your administrative. But the best way is administrative. Make sure your people are trained. If they know, they are aware, at least they will know what to do when they are possibly or potentially exposed. And then there's currently no standardized checklist, I've said, and then we have to adapt it by each sector. And then we must consider immunocompromised people, which are our high-risk groups, because they are not responding the same way to the agent as your healthy worker. So it's important also, after doing risk assessment, it has to be communicated to the workers. The workers must be informed of the hazards they are exposed to. They must be informed of the risk they could be faced with, as well as the outcome. But I'm sure with all the awareness campaigns, all the information pamphlets, we all know what is our hazards, what is our risk, and health effects from being exposed to COVID. And then engage your management as well, because they need to know if you need to put mitigation strategies in place, you're gonna need the budget for that. So they need to know more or less what to budget for. We have to be proactive in order to know what we need, so that when it comes to the following year, we know we have all the resources that we need to protect our workers. So involve management, involve the BRM advisors if you're not sure of the agent that you're dealing with, and also involve your committee. Different settings has got some committee in place. They can be named differently, but if they deal with infection and prevention control, these are the people to talk to or to involve. Call them in all the meetings, involve them in decision making, so that we are all in one thing to protect our workers. So the limitation about risk assessment is that it's not a quantitative process. So basically, there is no occupational exposure limit for exposure to biological agents. Unlike chemicals, with a chemical, they'll tell you, okay, you shouldn't past this limit of 10 ppm, for example, but hazardous biological agent, there is no such. So because HBAs are also diverse, you get viruses, you get bacteria, you get parasites, and sometimes you get them all together at once, so in one place. So doing risk assessment can be a bit tricky when it comes to that, unless you have the background knowing what to look for. But if you don't, you can still seek advice on that. Microorganisms can reproduce within a short space of time. You may have, let's say, a few CFUs at the moment, colony forming units. That's how we quantify when we do, for example, air sampling or surface sampling. But if the environmental conditions are conducive, high humidity, high temperature, they can multiply quicker, and the risk will be more than when we at a lower levels, sort of. And then they can also mutate, thus it will be difficult also to say what the risk could be. And then susceptibility of different individuals as well can make the whole thing complex. So it doesn't guarantee whether there is non-exposure or absent of all risk. As I've mentioned, they are invisible, they are everywhere. So attention has to be paid on when you do risk assessment. You have to take this into consideration. And then it's more difficult when you don't know the biological agent that you're dealing with, if it has not been characterized yet and it's unknown. And then people also can make errors, or they can ignore the risk that is available, and that can lead to incidents of the worker. And I've mentioned that involve your management so that you are able to resolve the lack of resources, so that you make sure you have all resources available to mitigate your risks. Staff competency is also important. The person that does the risk assessment must have the knowledge of what they are looking at, or the expertise, as that of doing risk assessment is limited. So in short, risk assessment is part of everyday life. Don't complicate it. Don't have fancy templates which people don't understand. Keep it as simple as you can, so that you make sure the workers understand it and they know it. And then you just say what you do, and then you do what you say. Then you'll be fine. So I'm going to hand over to the team members for practical, but our chair will take over now. Thank you, Asha.
Thank you very much. That's Ms. Monica Matuka, who's done a very detailed introduction for us to the BioRisk Assessment tool. I think it's critical for us to go through these slides again. In the meantime, I'm going to invite to join us the team that under Tabang Duba, who's also from the immunology and microbiology section of the National Institute of Occupational Health. They will be bringing the items to this, our screen space here in order to prepare. In the meantime, for those who've joined us slightly later, if you've not yet put your email address, name, surname, organization, and position in the chat box bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen, please type your name, surname, organization, position, and email address there for us immediately, so that we can have a complete register of, I think, at least 163 people logged on, and where there are more than one person at a particular screen, room, projection, or seminar room. Please do that handwritten attendance register and email it to info@nioh.ac.za. That very same bubble at the bottom, we'd like to invite you to add any questions there. We are now presenting to you as a group of people who are either directly engaged in cleaning, security, and other support services But we're engaging with you because you probably have colleagues that you supervise, you manage, or somebody else that you work with is responsible for managing. All this information is about preparing you to ensure that in the workplace, we are prepared around this particular additional biorisk, this additional hazard and problem that we face, but also we can put in place all that's required. So the biorisk assessment tool is critical that Ms. Matuka has dealt with. I now hand over to you and welcome our other colleague from the immunology and microbiology section, and that's Tabang Duba. Tabang, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I will be taking you through the donning and the doffing of gloves. So in simple, it means putting on gloves and taking off the gloves. So as we know, gloves have different sizes. So when you're going to select a glove, you need to check the size of your hand and then to select the appropriate glove for your hand. So in this case, I will be using the nitrile disposable gloves for this demonstration. So for this one, when we wear the gloves, the most important things that you need to remember, your hands need to be clean and dry, so that when you touch the gloves, you don't contaminate for the next person to use. So in this case, so I'm going to demonstrate how you wear the glove. So you first take the glove and then you wear it on your first hand and you make sure you pull so that you cover the wrist. And then with a clean hand, you take another glove and then you touch towards the tip and then you wear it and then you also pull to cover the wrist well. So once you are done, you are ready to go. Okay, now you are ready to go. You can see that the gloves are worn correctly. So after that, you do your normal daily job, and then let's assume now your gloves are now dirty. So we're now going to go to the doffing, which is the removing of the gloves. So in this one, remember the gloves, the outer surface of the gloves are now contaminated. So your aim is not to touch the contaminated surface of the gloves, because you will be defeating the aim of wearing the gloves. So in this case, I'm going to show you the first method, which is simple on how to doff the gloves. So what you do is you pinch towards the wrist level of the glove, and then towards your biosafety hazard bin, you pull it and peel it away from the hand and throw it into the bin. And then secondly, now you make sure that you didn't touch the contaminated area. You slide your finger through the other gloves and then you pull it away, not touching the contaminated surface, and then pull them inside out and throw them into the bin. And then that's it. And then we have another method, we call it the picky method. It may be a little bit difficult, but it is also very effective. So I will still wear the gloves the same way I did. The same procedure. Make sure that you cover the wrist. Okay, you're good to go. So for the picking method, the process is more like the same as the first method. So even with this one, you pick the glove towards the wrist area, In this time, you pull it halfway and then you make what we call a bead. So now you can see the clean area now it's exposed. So you have covered like more of your dirty area. So you use your clean area now and then you prick it, and then towards the biohazard bin, you remove the whole glove into the bin without touching the contaminated surface. And then from there, you just use your finger, and then you just use your finger to balance this one because it's the inside, and then you throw it into the bin. And that's it. Thank you.
And even for me as a layperson, that's absolutely clear. This video will be uploaded and you will have Tabang Durba's very clear explanation of how we do the gloves. Now we're going to go for respirators, am I correct? And I welcome to our session today, Lufuno Muleba. And Lufuno is also from the immunology and microbiology section. Lufuno, we've done this dozens of times. Please show our audience how this is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. I'll be demonstrating on how to don and doff the mask. We have different types of mask, and it's also important for you to know which type of mask that you have to wear, and also it's important to do fit testing for the mask. So with the mask that I'll be demonstrating, with the respirators that I'll be demonstrating, I'll start with a round respirator. And before you touch the respirator, it's always important to make sure that your hands are clean. It's either you wash them with water and soap, or if you don't have water and soap, you use the hand sanitizer. So you take your mask and you put your hand, the mask on the palm of your hand, and then you shape it on your nose, and then you take the first underneath elastic band, and then it goes under, and then you take the second one, you put it here. You also do a fit testing to make sure that your respirator is properly fit by taking your two hands from both hands, and then you press inwards, shaping to make sure that your respirator is properly fit, and then you blow in air to make sure that it's not leaking, and if ever it's leaking, you have the elastic band, which you can also pull to adjust the elastic. And then when you take it out, you make sure that you don't touch the front part. You use your hands like this, and then you balance. And then you take another hand, and then that's how you take out your respirator, and then you dispose it. And then we have another type of a mask, which is the V-Flex one. We have another type of a respirator, which is the V-Flex one. It has two elastic bands where you use your fingers like this, and then you put in, starting with your chin, and then you take the elastic band, one at the top and one at the bottom. You shape in the respirator, you pull it, and then you also do the same, you shape. And then after you do also a lip clasp, and then you see if ever it's fitting. If it's not, and then you can still do it and press it. And then when you take it out, you take the elastic band like this, and then you take it out, and then you dispose on the biohazard bin. So once you are done, you can then go and wash your hands, or you can use a hand sanitizer. In this way, you're decontaminating your hands. Thank you.
That's an excellent demonstration, and here you have the demonstration with regard to the donning and doffing of respirators by my colleague Lufono Muleba. And we are now going to do the final demonstration. Have I got that correct?
Okay, I just wanted to clarify one thing. When you doing the test, it's actually a seal check test. It's not fit testing. So there's a difference between the two. So seal check is just confirming that there is no any exposure or any air that's leaking from the respirator. That's all I needed to clarify. And as well as the mask, usually this is called a respirator, but because some people are used to calling it mask, it's not a mask. A mask is the one that we usually use, and it has strings at the back that you tie, the surgical mask.
Thank you. So remember, an important distinction. The surgical mask is the one that's not a respirator. The N95 mask is the respirator. Thank you for that clarification from Anika Matuka. And now we are going to go over to our third very practical presentation, and that's going to be on hand sanitizing, right? And I welcome to the NIOH's online Zoom session that's dealing with BioRisk Assessment for security officers and cleaning staff. I'm welcoming a colleague, Munyadziwa Uvali. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so afternoon everyone. So I'm going to be going through with you the proper methods of hand washing and hand sanitizing techniques. Okay, so things that you need to consider when you're actually washing and sanitizing your hands is that first of all, you need to remove your watches, your bracelets, as well as complex rings. So when we talk about complex rings, we're talking about multiple bands within one finger. This is because they actually interfere with the thorough cleaning of certain areas. So again, you also need to ensure that you apply sufficient soap and as well as hand sanitizer. So scrubbing during both hand sanitizing and hand washing process should take a minimum of 20 seconds. So if you do not have a timer, what you can do is sing the happy birthday song twice. So what you do on one hand, you should then do on the other hand. After washing and or sanitizing your hands, it is very important that you apply lotion or cream as to prevent any skin damage caused by the frequent hand washing. And as we can tell, during the COVID-19 period, we will be doing a lot of hand cleaning. So important to note that if you are going to be wearing gloves, please do not use any oil-based lotions or gloves under gloves, as they may actually damage the gloves. It is recommended that you use emollient creams if you are going to be wearing any gloves. So for the hand washing technique, it is the first choice of cleaning your hands when you've got access to clean water. It actually consists of five steps, which is you wet your hands, you then lather your hands with soap, you then scrub your hands, as we said, for 20 seconds using the following motions. So you rub your hands palm to palm with your fingers interlaced. The second one, place one hand over the back of the other hand and rub with the fingers interlaced. Number C, place the thumb on the center of the other hand's fingers and make rotational motions. Number D, clean fingertips by making circular, backwards and forward motions on the palm of the opposite hand. And then lastly, you must rub the armrests. So the fourth step is to rinse your hands thoroughly. The fifth step is to dry your hands completely with either a clean towel or a tissue paper or a toilet roll. So we are going to go now and see a demonstration video of how to actually wash your hands properly. So all the steps that I've actually spoken about in the previous video are done here. As you can see, the demonstrator is making sure that they do not actually touch the faucet. They're using their elbows to do so. If you are going to touch the faucet, please make sure that you use a tissue paper. So as you can see, the various scrubbing motions that are taking place on the video currently, ensure that it takes 20 seconds to do this whole process. Do not forget your wrists. As we said, that your gloves end on your wrists, so you need to make sure those areas are clean as well. And as you can see, we are rinsing our hands thoroughly now, one hand at a time. Make sure it's thoroughly clean to remove all the soap. We are going to close our faucet with our elbow, and we're going to take our paper towel. Make sure your hands are thoroughly dry before you touch any surfaces. After this, this is when you then proceed to lotion your hands. Okay. So we're moving on now to the hand sanitizing technique. You need to ensure that you apply sufficient amount of hand sanitizer, and this is hand dependent. So what you will find is that if you realize that you haven't applied enough hand sanitizer, please go back and apply more. So the hand sanitizing procedure should also take 20 seconds as per the hand washing as well. So these are the steps that we follow. The first one, we apply hand sanitizer on the palm of one hand, which could be the left, and then we clean the fingertips of the opposite hand, which would be the right, by making circular motions, back and forward motions. The third one, we rub the palms together to apply the sanitizer to the opposite hand, which would be the right, to clean the fingertips of the opposite hand, which is the left. The fourth one, rub your hands palm to palm with your fingers interlaced. Place one hand over the back of the other and rub with the fingers interlaced. The sixth one, place the thumb on the center of the other hand's finger and make rotational motions. The seventh one, rub with the arm rests. Allow the sanitizer to completely dry before touching any objects, as this is very important. So now we're going to move on to two videos that will show. One shows a gel form of a hand sanitizer, and then the other one actually shows a liquid form of the hand sanitizer. As we said, the application of hand washing and hand sanitizing are the same. Make sure that you do this for 20 seconds. As you can see, you are washing first, you're cleaning first the fingers, you rub, you clean the thumb, interlace, and ensure that the hand sanitizer is completely dry before you touch any surfaces. So the gel foam hand sanitizer, it's quite thicker and takes longer to dry, but the procedure is the same. Clean the fingertips, rub palm to palm, interlace the fingers, clean the thumb, backhand interlacing, make sure the wrists are clean, and allow to dry. After this procedure, once the hand sanitizer is dry, you should then proceed to apply lotion. So we are going to have a practical demonstration of both the hand washing practical and the hand sanitizing practical.
So I'm welcoming here together with Munyaziwa, apologies, but at the tip of the tongue there. I'm also welcoming our other colleague who who's working here in the NIOH building, and that is Lindo Kumaro. And I hand over you for your demonstration. I just need to adjust the camera to ensure that you all are on screen.
I think the important thing to make here is that sometimes we demonstrate these different types of hand washing procedures using elbow taps, but we want to show you that you can use very simple containers that contain water. You don't need to have an elbow tap. So improvise where you can, as long as we have good clean water and we have some soap, that ordinary soap that we can use for hand washing. As you can see, Mr. Kumalo has leathered his hands and he's busy performing the palm-to-palm motions. He is now interlacing, the front interlacing in which his fingers are interlaced, and backward interlacing with one hand over the other. He is now cleaning his fingertips, making backward and forward motions. As you remember, what you do on one hand, you should do on the other. He is cleaning his thumb, making rotational motions. He is cleaning his wrists. Now he is thoroughly rinsing his hands. Make sure the hands are thoroughly dry and proceed to apply the relevant lotion. Thank you.
Okay, is that the end of the session? So we're just changing the setting here for the next practical demonstration. I am very proud of my colleagues. I think we are doing quite well today in demonstrating these aspects. You may see a bit of movement of the camera positioning. It is because we are using a larger space than just a stationary speaker or slides on your screen. So we're now setting up for the next activity, and I hand you back to my colleague.
Okay, so following, we are going to do now the hand sanitizing practical. We'll ask our security personnel, Mr. Mia, to demonstrate it for us. And this is important for work places where you do not have access to water ready. Thank you, Mr. Mia. Mr. Mia is going to apply sufficient hand lotion for his size of hand. He is cleaning his fingertips now. Moving on to the next fingertip as he has applied the hand sanitizer to the next hand. He is doing an interlacing, front interlacing, palm to palm cleaning. He still interlacing front palm to palm, cleaning his thumb. Backwards, interlacing, one hand over the other. Cleaning his wrists. And you can only start to touch objects once your hands have been fully dry. Remember, hand lotion is very important to prevent
to prevent your hands from getting dry. Okay, thank you.
That's excellent. And now my colleagues are clearing the NIOH studio set of all the items required in order to see the very important demonstrations. That is firstly by Tabang Duba on donning and doffing of the gloves. I think they are essential in the healthcare setting where healthcare workers or hospital staff are required to use them, and in this particular case where those security and cleaning staff may be exposed to virus. Then we also had the respirator donning and doffing demonstration by Lufono Muleva. That is also from the immunology and microbiology section. And finally, we've now had a very useful and important hand sanitizer, both in washing as well as the application of the gel or liquid hand sanitizer. I'm proud to say that at the NIH, as a staff member, we have all these hand sanitizer bottles at very key places within the different floors and entrances and toilet and ablution facilities. So now the last aspect is the scenarios. Before our question and answer, are we now going to have our panel? Okay, so I'm going to ask you just to bear with us. We're going to shift a few chairs into your screen so that we can have myself and the three people just showing. We will require the questions to be made visible for us on the screen on high resolution. So I'm going to ask both Monica, who's helping here, as well as Dr. Tanusha Singh, and also Dr. Odette to join us here in front. We're going to need that screen in order to see if the, okay. So I'm going to just do a slight adjustment so that you don't see as much of our walls in our office here. Okay, I think that should be fine. And I'm going to ask my colleagues just to join us here. You have been posting questions on your chat. I'm going to ask somebody just to scroll the laptop typed aspects there. Thank you very much. The head of our IT team, Tabani, is helping out with the questions. So we've been capturing the questions in a Word document to assist us. And also Tabani's colleague Glenn will place some of the questions for us also on the screen. So I'm now welcome as part of the panel discussion. Am I still out of the picture? Yes, I still am. So I'm going to join you. If you just shift slightly in that direction, am I in? Not really? And now I'll use the gadget in order to just do this. And there we are. That should be fine. So on your left-hand side, my extreme right, you have one of our presenters, Ms. Monica Matuka, who did the BioRisk Assessment tool. Next to her is the head of the immunology microbiology section, Dr. Tanusha Singh, who's also the chairperson of the NIOH's COVID-19 outbreak response team, responsible for all of these activities. Next to her is Dr. Odette, and now I'm just for the Valmik, apologies. That was a quick memory lapse. And then next to me on my right-hand side is Ms. Munyadziwa Muvali. She's also from the immunology and microbiology section, who took responsibility for showing us the hand washing and hand sanitizer activities. You've been posting questions for us, and we now want to embark on a process of dealing with them, preferably in sequence and in terms of the highlights. So should we start with that question that's there at the bottom or just at the top? Okay, so Dr. Singh, Tanusha has highlighted a key question that popped up in our bubble. I remind you, please type your questions at the bottom in the chat bubble. We've not yet used the Q&A section, so just use the chat bubble for now. We won't be able to monitor both. The question to you as panelists, is there no way to avoid touching the tap with the hands as one is about to start washing?
Yes, so definitely there's quite a number of videos online wherein other people who have got a training faucet need to actually use a paper towel or a tissue to actually open it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I sometimes use the one that I've just dried my hands with and just wipe the tap and the base a little bit before I throw it away. So would that help?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I hope that covers your question. I think it's a very important and critical question. So can I be guided, Glenn, to the next question? I still cannot see. Okay.
I think that many people have been requesting the presentations and the videos. And we will make sure that these presentations are sent to you via email. The videos will be on the website. So the website details will be shared with you at the end of the session.
Okay, so in the Q&A at the bottom, Glenn, with a little red 10 right at the bottom, I think there may be some questions there. And if you could, in the meantime, while we watch that, can somebody just, on the other laptop, Tabani, look for questions in the chat group, please? Okay, so the presentations will be made available to you, certainly. As a reminder, if you have put your email address, name, surname, and organization position into the chat box, we'll certainly be able to get back to you. For those rooms where there are more than one person, we're going to ask you to keep a hard copy register and please email that to info@nih.ac.za. We will not be able to have a two-way communication with you if you don't. Please share your details with us. We have at one stage had at least 163 connections to today's Zoom, and assuming there's more people at some other connections. So with regard to the outsourced security staff and health facilities, let me rephrase that. With regard to the outsourced security staff at health facilities, who should provide PPE, that is masks, gloves, and sanitizer? The service provider company or the health facility where they are posted? My sense is that the site, the workplace, remains the responsibility of, for lack of a better term, the primary employer, right? So if it's a Department of Health hospital, the Department of Health and whoever is dedicated the responsibility at that workplace should take responsibility for health and safety overall. Unless there's a specific written agreement between the outside service provider and the core primary employer to delegate as part of that contract certain things like PPE administration, compensation-related administration, then it still remains the responsibility in the case of the public sector, the Department of Health, and in the private sector, the range of private sector institutions. So I think at your workplace, you need to clarify that with both this external service provider as well as with the management representatives who's responsible for occupational health and safety and infection infection prevention and control. I always forget the P. Infection prevention and control for those people. I'm not sure if my colleagues want to add anything, Tanusha.
Essentially, the employer is responsible for providing PPE. The arrangement about being on site, that needs to be negotiated.
And may need to be clarified
yes.
at each specific site. So the next question, Glenn, I just wanted to find out if it's a legal requirement or good practice that you review the risk assessment every 2 years. If it is a legal requirement, when the act is stated. And I think implied in the question, Annika, is now that we have this new biological risk of COVID-19 as the disease and the SARS, I forget the full name, as the actual virus. Should a new risk assessment not be conducted now?
Yes, it should definitely, like I've mentioned in the presentation, that if there is any new change or any incidents and so on, it should be done. And yes, it is a legal requirement as stated by the hazardous biological agent regulation, that it's be done every 2 years and when there is any change.
So Okay, lots of requests for the presentations. As you indicated, we have undertaken, given that you've given your email addresses, to send this to you. Right? We'll send it to you in PDF session, in format, and we will indicate you where, either on website or elsewhere, you may find additional resources through the email and through other means of communicating with you. The next question is regarding the protocols. Could you please discuss the protocols for the safe closing, securing, removal, and disposal of the disposal containers? I would assume that is the biohazard containers that we had with a red liner for use protective equipment, to the panel.
So I'm not getting it, discussing the protocols. Are they requesting us to include it in the training sessions?
Okay, maybe firstly, is the protocol applicable and what does the protocol contain?
Okay, it does say, actually we do even have a practical demonstration of that as well. There is, so safe closing, it means you must have you have your bag liner, you have it in the box, and you close it, and each waste generator has got a specific practice number which they need to use during disposal. So you get the stickers that has that practice number on there. After closing your bag, sealing your box properly, you stick on that label with your practice number, and then you write all the details that's required by the department. Then, if you're going to store it internally, you make sure you store it in a minimum period. It mustn't stay long in the building. And then you call the contractor as soon as possible to come and collect the waste off-site. After disposal, the waste generator has to make sure they get the certification of destruction from the contractor, because they are as liable as the contractor because they produced the waste.
And I think it's important, before Tanisha adds, that now we don't remind each other about legalities. I think what we need to know now is, what is my role as the employer? What's my role and responsibilities as the contractor? What's my role and responsibilities as supervision and management in charge of cleaners and security? And what's my role as a security and cleaning worker performing certain very essential tasks? Tanisha?
I just wanted to add that although we didn't play the video today, we will endeavor to put it on the website as well.
Well, thank you for that. Our next question is, we are setting up this is from Jackie, 2 COVID teams for informal settlements. Please advise on guidelines for COVID suspect cases for informal settlements. What process can we follow if we have diseased residents? So my sense is that this question is applicable to all people who may be suspected of having been exposed, who may be suspected of showing symptoms, and who may potentially through a test be proven to be positive. What is that general advice and guidelines you have, including for people who may live in informal settlements?
So the general advice is that they need to contact the NICD. They will discuss the specific protocols to follow in terms of the persons in the informal settlements. But in terms of the process, it should not be different.
Mm-hmm. And then the question of where there may perhaps be deceased residents, my sense is, if somebody were to pass away, unfortunately, because of COVID-19 infection, that would be in a hospital setting. And in the hospital setting, there would probably be very important measures put in place. And if anything happens, maybe within a home, it's important for people to maintain some social distance and isolation of that particular room, and use the NICD hotline or the hospital that they've been in touch with to ensure that proper procedures and proper staff comes along in order to help with that. Odette?
I just wanted to add a little bit to that. You know, in the event of someone being having symptoms and of the possibility of having the infection, like Tanisha said, it's very important to contact the NICD helpline, but also it's important if private hospitals are used, or GP services are used, or even public hospitals, to try to call ahead if the patient needs to be assessed, to call ahead so that the person can take into account how to protect the workers that they're going to in that health facility, so that they can prepare adequately if they need to be seen. Yep, and then also it's important to do contact tracing and isolate that person. So that person should be isolated in some kind of space so that all these things can go on while they get help.
Anything to add? Can we move to the next question?
Dealing with the deceased residents.
Right, yes.
There's specific protocols to follow, and also in terms of the President's pronouncements, there's specific restrictions to follow when you are dealing with the funeral services, etc. In terms of the number of people and the time, and even catering is restricted if there is a funeral. In terms of handling deceased bodies or dead bodies, there's specific protocols as well, and there is guidelines available by the Department of Environmental Affairs.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question that we had in the Q&A section is that is from Dr. Nyasulu of Wits University. In a workplace, we do use the big tissue rolls used during your demonstrations. Many times we find the tissue wet in some parts. This can lead to cross-contamination. What do you recommend when using the large workplace tissue rolls to avoid cross-contamination?
Okay, I'm not sure what makes the tissue wet, but I'm thinking it's possibly close to the tap source. So if that's the case, then the roll must be kept a little bit far from the tap source. Or alternatively, they can use the dispensing towel that's inside, that's usually mounted on the wall if that doesn't work.
And also perhaps an awareness. Maybe people are waiting and when they're pulling the towel with their wet hands. So just to raise that awareness that there could be a potential contamination issue and show them how it should be done to avoid that from happening.
Yeah, maybe one aspect to consider, and we're clearly trying to find all the answers for this, is to perhaps secure your toilet, the hand paper before you start. I'm not sure if that's an issue with regard to contamination, but certainly to wipe things off afterwards when we clear that our hands have in fact been properly sanitized. So the next question we have, is there no way to avoid touching? I think we've covered the one about touching the tap. And then there was the legal requirements with regard to the 2 years risk assessment that we did cover. So there's the third one in this list. Do you wash your hand every time you touch the surfaces at the workplace?
It's not all the time. It depends on what you do. You'll have gloves sometimes when you do that. You don't need to wash your hands. But once you finish with your activity, then you will take off the gloves, then you will wash your hands.
I think colleagues need to get into the habit of regularly washing, but it would not be practical to wash it every time you touch a surface. And they can make the deduction of when they need to wash it. And then also to say that, cleaning of surfaces becomes important there so that you don't have to all the time wash because your surfaces are being cleaned.
I think that's essential, the combination of hand hygiene and surface being clean, but particularly what is the nature of the activity that you engage in? If the nature of the activity has a very clear indication in your new risk assessment, the new risk assessment now that COVID-19 is in fact a workplace issue for all of us, if that new risk assessment says that the nature of the activity I perform, and it's difficult to say what you might be referring to in your workplace, then clearly the guideline would be indicating, the risk assessment indicate the frequency of not just cleaning surfaces, but also the frequency of hand washing that's required. Our next question, please note that the employer is responsible for safe workplaces, therefore the employer must provide. I think we've covered that particular point. With access control being a major security requirement, people are having to sign in and out of the premises. How do we ensure that our security officers are protected from direct contact?
Okay, that will be covered in the scenarios.
We are going to do the scenarios after our panel?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's go through the questions. I think there's a quick comment people want to make on that question. I think what's very critical is that your risk assessment will recommend that you have the necessary protocols, necessary procedures, and a flow diagram that guides your security staff, but we'll cover that in more detail. The next question is, so how often do we wash hands or use the hand sanitizer? What is the recommendation roughly during the shift of 8 hours in an office environment? I think this is a very specific context. Consider a non-visible, dirty environment.
The WHO recommend that, for example, for the 5 moments of hand hygiene, you either do it before you do a clean procedure, like eating, or if it's I'll give an example of the healthcare worker before touching a sick person, or you do it after you touch the contaminated surface, after you visit the bathroom, after you touch any contaminated surface, then you do that. So you based on your risk assessment also, you'll be able to determine your daily activities and when you are able to wash in between.
And preferably hand washing with sanitizer after having treated or dealt with the patient before moving on to any other patient or in any other room.
Depends on your accessibility. If you are close to the basin, you wash your hands. If you're not, then you use your sanitizer.
In public hospitals, there's generally a central basin in the wards and near the rooms. The next question is, what measures can be put in place regarding biometric finger scanners, where they are used for opening doors? I do know that the universities near us here in Johannesburg, University of Johannesburg, Wits University, and University of Pretoria have made a decision because all of their campuses have this particular finger scanning device. What is the panel's response to that question around biometric devices?
So the one thing is they can use a wipe, alcohol-based wipe that can, disinfect the panel. The other thing is to sanitize before and after.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is, what measures can be put in place that's the biometric? Would you please be able to provide us with recipes for hand sanitizers? And that is for the 70% ethanol. I'm not sure if that's a misspelling there. Is it IVE? I have used, okay, my apologies, my English teacher won't be proud of me, but I have used 745 milliliters methylated spirits, that's 95% ethanol, plus 250 milliliters water, and for sodium hypochlorite, I've used 30 milliliters of 3.5% jig plus 1,000 milliliters, that's 1 liter, to give a 0.1% solution. The reference there is the, I think, J hospital infection for the end concentrations. I'm not sure about that last part, but as a panel, can you help me there?
So there is a WHO recipe that is available, and we will put it on our website. And then we also have a disinfectant training session that was done last week, and that presentation is available on the website as well to give guidance.
It's a slightly bigger, thank you, Tabani. Can you use your regional risk assessment and hazardous biological agents to the existing? And that's an incomplete question. So I'm going to perhaps just add something regarding the question there. So the question could be, do we use the original risk assessment that might be between 0 or 2 years old and add, I think, the COVID-19 as a new biological risk factor? I've just interpreted the question.
So what you're going to do is you're going to look at what you currently have done, so your current risk assessment, and then review that and see whether those controls you had in place is adequate, or if it's not adequate, then you can then add additional controls to mitigate against COVID. Because you may have strategies in place already that would cover it, so it's good to review the existing risk assessment.
So if I'm an employer and I don't have an internal occupational medical practitioner, I don't have an internal occupational health practitioner, I may not yet be contracted to a session or outside. What would you recommend is the support I require for healthcare provision and services? Maybe a dentist, maybe a GP, and so on. in order to ensure that my risk assessment is in fact updated?
So they can contact the NIOH for advice if they need advice, and we will provide some guidance.
Our next question is, are there any extra measures for employees sharing workspaces? And this seems to be referring to open plan office spaces or open plan workspaces generally, other than just office spaces. It could be the pharmacy behind the counter, or it could be a lab. Advice on this one?
That's dependent on the employer as well, what policies they have in place and what they have decided on the mitigation strategies.
Yes.
Odette?
I think that you have to look at your risk assessments, and the risk assessments, as I'm sure is said, was identifying the risk and assessing the risk. And so part of the assessment of risk is like what control measures are in place, and then what further controls need to be done. So like in open spaces, we look at our hierarchy of controls, and we try to go firstly for our engineering controls. So how structurally can we open windows, increase ventilation, isolate certain processes maybe that are more, there's more contact, like in a reception, putting in some kind of screen if there are people coming from the outside that we don't know, infection rates coming in. And then further to what Annika said is having administrative controls in place, looking at the SLPs, looking at all the different practices that happen. Excuse me.
And so my sense is, if you had a reception area where the individual might have had just a desk, and I would come in and there would be a direct conversation of that desk or counter area, I think I've heard or did recommend that perhaps there should be some sort of glass or screen or physical barrier, which is essentially engineering control. So, Tanusha?
No, that's fine. I wanted to suggest that we look at the scenarios,
Yes.
and then if we still have to
We can get back to the
we can get
question.
back to the questions, and or we can respond to the questions and circulate the answers as we've done in previous
Yes.
sessions. So we can give Annika that platform for the
Right.
scenarios.
So, Annika, if you could just prepare, I'm not sure what you need to do. In the meantime, I need to remind you, do we need to remove the chairs, or do we just stay here, Annika?
I think it's fine.
Okay, so as a panel, we remain seated. My colleague Annika is preparing for a scenario situation. And at this point in time, I need to remind you, if you've not yet placed your name, surname, organization, and position, plus email into the chat box, the bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen, please do so. You can add any questions, and we've been looking in this webinar format, which we're using for the first time. We can have a maximum of 500 webinar connections of individual or multiple people safely sitting in a room. We want to have your details in order to communicate with you so that we can send to you the necessary presentations and other resources, support documents, email and website links, etc. So please do that. And if you do have questions which may not get to in the session, we will undertake to answer those questions for you and add them to our frequently asked questions resource that we have also been preparing. So this is the BioRisk Assessment for Security Officers and Cleaning Staff session of the National Institute for Occupational Health, the NIOH. We're coming to you live via Zoom from our Braamfontein, Johannesburg building, and we are addressing almost 200 current Zoom links. I will ask my colleagues to update me just before we close with regard to the total number of connections. For those who are not on an individual laptop connecting with us, we're going to ask you please to take a physical attendance register of the people in your room, and please scan and email that with all the details to info@nioh.ac.za. That's info@nioh.ac.za. I hand over to Ms. Annika Matuka from the Immunology and Microbiology section, who's going to look at the scenarios of BioRisk assessment by job tasks. Thank you, Annika.
Thank you, Ashraf. So before I carry on, I just want to highlight that we're just using scenarios based on our observations as we visit workplaces. We may be missing something, so please if there is any other risks or anything, additional information that you would like to share with us, you are more than welcome to do that in our bubble chat, and then we'll consider that and use that information to update our information for training sessions. So you get the security at the boom gate, for example, and then if you look at this security at the picture, the security will normally be in the little house and then away from the gate. So when doing your risk assessment, those are some of the factors that you look at. How far is the worker from the source of exposure? So in this instance, we're saying at the boom gate, the exchange of the license card. Some securities, when you come in with a car, they'll either ask you to fill in a register, if it's a manual one, but most of the time, they just open the gate for you, and then they'll only ask for your license. So when touching that card, you have to think of the risk involved from the person who's driving. As at that moment, you don't know your visitor, whether they are infectious or not. And then I've mentioned the manual registration with pen. That's in case when the boom is not working. Usually they will use the manual registers for people to complete. So you have to consider now, you have a register which is used by everyone. Basically everyone that comes in, they use that register. What is the potential of exposure? And then the pen, always mainly the same pen that they use. So the people can be at risk there of exposure, even the security, because after giving it to the visitor, they take the pen back. So what control measures can you put in place? For the boom gates, okay, the greater than 1 to 2 meter distance is met. It meets the criteria, unless now they do the manual, which is a problem. That's where you should look at and make sure you mitigate the risk. Either you can suggest that probably the gates remain open, or find another way, another means of registering, or make sure that the gate is fixed within a short period of time. And then for the worker, you also have that house with the window, which serves as a control measure, because they first of all, they sit alone. If not alone, they'll be probably with their colleague, and then they have open window there. They must just ensure that the surface is always decontaminated. And the remote that's been used to open the gates as well, if they are sharing it, or in case of shift change, they may be using the same remote. So we have to make sure that it's decontaminated as well. And we always have to make the hand sanitizer available for the security, especially when they are doing the manual registration, as well as handling other things like they have keys, because you find out sometimes they also even come here when the thing's not working, they open it somehow, I don't know how, but they need to hand sanitize. And then employer has to make sure that there's a policy in place for the entire facility, or the SOP for the workers. They must know what they are handling, what is their exposure, their hazards and risk, and how you as the employer have to make sure that you've mitigated the risk. In simple terms also, you can keep posters for them as well, or even for the visitors. Like for example, now with COVID, you can have a small poster at the security window or wherever, where you show the respiratory hygiene etiquette, and then where you tell them of the processes that are in place, like if they need to screen the incoming visitors. You can have a few bullets that tells the visitor that this is the steps we're gonna follow, and then from here you go wherever. And then staff rotation can be used as also a measure of control, since you'll be minimizing the risk of exposure for workers, as they will also, like you have different employees coming to work and coming into contact with visitors. And then, or I've mentioned the CAT scan as well, that can be mitigation strategy to avoid doing manual registration. And then training, that's your most important administrative control. The securities have to know their hazards and risks and what controls are in place, all their SOPs. Also, they must know what symptoms they can experience, especially when it comes to the coronavirus. Those 3 main symptoms of the cough, the fever, and the other one. Okay, and then they should be encouraged to report that, because it's also for their own safety, especially they are working as a group, so they may transmit the disease to one another. So the earlier the detection, the better to keep our workers safer from exposure, even our visitors for that matter. And then they should be encouraged or trained on self-isolation. Can we please move to the next slide? Okay, another type of security is the ones you find on the counters, for example, at airports. So there, as you can see, the risk factor is the less than 1 meter distance, because these people are interacting closely with the travelers. And then you may find travelers who may be coughing or sneezing, and then they use this equipment to search the travelers, or equipment that they move for the baggage, the luggages. And then you have contaminated surfaces where those trays are being moved. Then you also get incidental touching of the worker, the security with the traveler, of which they are of unknown status. Those are your risk factors as a security, for example, in your airport, but you can get it in any other setting. So the control measures in this instance is that hand sanitizers has to be accessible to the workers, to the securities, and they must be next to their work sites. And you may also want to provide a respirator in this case, because there's high volumes of travelers, and also I've mentioned that you know their status, and there may be an incident where a traveler can just cough or sneeze there while they are searching them or while searching their bags. So you may need to provide a respirator for that worker. Also, for bigger places than this, the surface decontamination may be an ideal solution in order to decontaminate the area. But also it depends on the workplace and the resources available for that. The detector device that they use for searching can also be contaminated because it's used on everyone. So there you will also probably need a decontamination process. Although it's a better tool to use for search instead of the security touching the traveler with their own hands, but that must be decontaminated as well. So workplaces have to have policies in place of what, after doing their risk assessment and with the knowledge that they know, what they have put in place on guiding the workers and the entire workforce. And then staff rotation, we've spoken about that. The shift work, it's better because it's less duration of exposure for different workers, and most importantly, training is mentioned. Then you get the securities, for example, that works at the mines, where before a worker enters the workplace, they do breathalyzer testing to check whether they've taken alcohol or not. That's for their safety though, because you need a healthy employee who will do the job properly. So this process, it requires a worker to blow onto a device. After blowing, it will read and give the results of whether they are fit for work or they are not. And usually this blowing, it's on a device. It's on a device. And at the settings, you'll find the workers queuing here. In the mine, you know, it's a lot of miners that comes in early shift together. So you'll find out that they are queuing, they are blowing and coming in. Once they have passed, they go in like that. But the risk here is that the distance is less than 1 meter. They are too close to each other. And also, this machine, sometimes it doesn't, if it doesn't read, they repeat it just to make sure, because of the issues with the employer and employees. Sometimes it will be like, but this machine is not working or whatever. So I'm trying to drive the point here that it means that worker must stand here for a while blowing. And while blowing, they might be releasing droplets of saliva from their mouth and maybe exposing others. But in this case, at least there was a control measure. They have wipes here for people. After a person finishes, you wipe, you throw into the bin, you carry on. So for that purpose, at least there's a mitigation strategy. But the distance is still something that to be looked at. They can probably keep the group somewhere on the side and bring them one to do that. It depends on an employer also what a strategy they will have. And I've mentioned the device must always be disinfected, and then the security must also be provided with hand sanitizer also. And then we need policies in place. We mentioned that some of the mitigation strategies will be common to all, but they may differ with a specific task. So staff rotation also for screening purposes also. I've mentioned that either also the employer can screen the workers just to make sure you protect other workers from the possibly infected worker. And they must be encouraged to report while maintaining confidentiality so that they don't get the stigma from their co-workers. And then the screening for the visitor as well, that will help. It works on 2 ways. And then training, it's very critical as mentioned on the previous slide. Then when we move to cleaners, you get those cleaners that are in the open, like in public places where you get like human traffic. So in those places, the exposure is unknown because you don't know who comes in there and whether they're infectious or not. That's a risk factor. And then people may be coughing and sneezing there. And then the droplets settle on surfaces, which the cleaner have to come and clean. You get the contaminated equipment as well as contaminated surfaces. So in that case, the control measures that can be put in place, firstly, policies have to be put in place, and then the worker must practice hand wash. But usually the cleaner will always have a bucket of water with whatever soap or disinfectant they use, so they can still be on the safe side. But if not, then make sure you give that. If there is no water access close by, then you may want to provide hand sanitizer for them, or gloves, because those surfaces are contaminated and the cleaners usually have to be provided with reusable gloves. So they have to have their PPE on, and they must be trained that the reusable gloves, after using them, they still need to be disinfected also. You need a solution with a specific disinfectant where they will soak those gloves, and after soaking, they let them dry for reuse for the next day. Or keep extra gloves in place in case they don't dry, then you have a backup of gloves that they can use tomorrow until the other one gets dry. And they are also encouraged not to exchange gloves. As we have seen in some settings, workers will just exchange gloves. That causes cross-contamination. And then the worker must use the correct disinfectant, because we have observed also that in some instances, because they have all this, have access to all these containers, even if the one is dedicated for a specific task, they'll just take any and use any for that, which doesn't serve the purpose and won't do the job. So they must be trained that this specific chemical is for the floors, this one is for this one is for this, so that they can know the difference, because disinfectants are chosen based on what they're going to use for and based on the target organisms of interest. And then they must also be trained on the hazards and the risk associated with the disinfectant they are using. They must also be trained on diluting the disinfectant, as mentioned previously. The concentration of the cleaning solution is important in decontamination. And then also you would want to give this worker also a respirator because of unknown exposure. Some people will say the cleaners doesn't require respirators because they are not at risk. But look at your risk assessment, check what the task the person is using. In public places like this, you would want to provide a respirator for your worker. And then for cleaners in the offices, usually offices are regarded as a clean environment, but now we're dealing with a virus which is transmitted via contact. So we have to take that into consideration. So the risk factor can be an infectious employee, or even it has been reported that some people are asymptomatic and they can still show positive results at the later stage. So at that point, you don't know that the person is sick, so there may be some risk involved. And then you look also at the contaminated equipment, your tables, your keyboards, your cupboards, your door handle. So such surfaces could be risk factors. And then the control of exposure, it's hand wash again. And then the cleaner can be provided with gloves, but if you just have to judge. If they are using like the water and soap to clean, they still have access to like some sort of decontamination while doing their job. And then, but they must also use the correct disinfectant, or they can use the soap. And then there must be policies in place. So you should ask yourself also, will it be practical for this worker to get a respirator? So depending on your risk assessment as well, you will determine whether the person should get a respirator or not. But I wouldn't think if a worker or the office occupant is infectious, those people wouldn't be at work, because that would have been identified earlier and they'll have to self-isolate and stay at home when they are sick. So when the office is being cleaned, what is the risk of exposure? Will that person need a respirator? I don't think so at that point. Okay, for cleaners at the healthcare, when infectious people are treated, I would think those will be at more risk because they are within the wards. Some of them might even be working in those wards that the infectious patients are in. So somehow the distance may be shorter, and then you have patients that cough or sneeze, or even visitors that comes to visit their families that will be coughing or sneezing, that those could be a source of exposures. You get your contaminated equipment in the hospital. They have to clean the surfaces, those small tables on there, and wipe the other surface. So those could be risk factors. And then also incidental touching sometimes there. And then controlling exposure, also we're going back to hand wash and respiratory hygiene. They must be taught, people must be taught on, they must cover, when they cough and they sneeze, they must cover their mouth. And the worker here, I think gloves should be compulsory because of the type of work they are doing and the type of setting that they are working at. And they should use also the correct disinfectant that has been prescribed by the hospital based on their risk assessment. And then the symptomatic people must be provided with the mask in order to keep the thing from transmission. Even the worker, when at work and they experience symptoms at work, they must also be provided with the mask, and then proper procedures must be followed on how to handle this worker. So I'm going to conclude with general recommendations that were not discussed on the other slide, some of them, like maybe the facility or the setting may want to restrict the visits or shorten visiting hours. They may prescribe at how it suits them, and maybe suggest online meetings. If their workers need to have meetings, maybe they should put in their policy that they should have online meetings. That way, we're reducing exposure of the securities at the gates, for example, because they don't have to deal with the in and out of many people who come into the workplace. And then proper PPE based on the risk assessment must be provided, and as well as waste disposal resources, and the worker must be trained on that. And those that are affected must be provided with support from the employer. And then workers are encouraged to also disclose their travel history, either before they travel. If there are policies in place, those policies will be followed, or when they come back from travel, they must inform the employer immediately. And then lastly, all co-workers who must be informed. If there's any affected worker or their colleague in the workplace, must be informed also of their risk. Although names doesn't have to be mentioned, because we want to keep it as confidential as possible and avoid stigmatization. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was my colleague, Ms. Onika Matuka from the Immunology and Microbiology section, dealing with the scenarios, very practical scenarios, and very practical demonstration of the work settings within which cleaners and security would have to work, with very, very practical questions for you to consider how you specifically implement that in your own workplaces. We cannot give you direct answers and guidance for your specific setting. We can give you the broad guidelines, and you would need to ensure that your own risk assessment, which is necessary for you to now do given COVID-19 as a new biorisk within our workplaces. I'm going to perhaps just for a few minutes, and I know we are sort of pressed for time, just to look at one or two questions. As a reminder, please, if you've not yet put your email address, name, surname, organization, position into the bubble chat at the bottom, please do that. Add any questions also in the bubble chat, the chat bubble that you want us to eventually answer. And just to say thank you to the registers that have already been emailed to info@nih.ac.za, info@nih.ac.za, by Louise Boysons from the NHLS remote site, as well as Dr. Zahida Sonde, the Occupational Medical Registrar at Grootsky Hospital, who's linked to the Western Cape Department of Health and UCT. And then two quick, a little bit of news updates. President Ramaphosa has issued a letter to the nation after not having had the address last night or this morning. And I think the minister in the presidency has announced that there will be an address later this evening. We'll probably get to know, what the National Command Council has decided could be the additional measures we may need to undertake. Maybe a quick question, is that okay to the panel? Or should I just conclude now?
I think we are really pressed for time. There's some really good questions that have come through, scan through the questions. And I think what we will do is provide answers and then email that to all the participants, because some of them are really useful for others as well. And then maybe if there's some take-home messages from the group, Ashraf, if you want to maybe take that.
Yes. So now on our biorisk assessment for security officers and cleaning staff, I'm going to ask the panel, Ms. Onika Matuka on your most extreme left, Dr. Tanusha Singh next to her. My apologies, tongue is busy getting too dry. Dr. Odette Volmik in the middle, and Ms. Mudyadziwa Muvali on my immediate side here. Any final comments from you? You have about 30 to 40 seconds to. We have cleaning and security colleagues in our different workplaces. Today's session on Zoom here by the NIOH was about focusing on them specifically as not necessarily clinical frontline workers, but they play critical roles, support roles in our health settings, both public and private. Anika?
Okay, in short, I just want to mention that risk assessment will differ by sector, firstly, and secondly, it will differ by job task. So that should be taken into consideration when conducting risk assessment.
Tanusha, obviously.
Just to add to that as well, whereas you have this whole basket of controls, that controls will be informed by the risk assessment that is job specific, as Anika mentioned. Just to say as well, we have seen some questions coming out on N95 respirators and dust masks. We did have a training session on respirators last week, and that presentation is available on our website. So we encourage the viewers to please look at that presentation. It clarifies the issue between a mask and a respirator, the cup-shaped respirator versus the duck ball respirator, as well as the difference between a seal check and fit testing. And then also just to say that it's no use providing a respirator or mask or gloves to the cleaning and security unless you train them adequately and proper use of it. So from my side, I hope that employees can look into the training of these.
And the surgical masks that Tanusha refers to, or the N95 respirators, should only be applicable if your risk assessment indicates that that particular cleaning or security staff member requires to wear that, including other aspects like gloves. Just to remind you that all those elements of hierarchy of containment and hierarchy of control that Anika referred to earlier are all related and connected, including the person who meets you at the boom gate, all the aspects of hand washing, sanitizer, etc., and potentially touching your driver's license card. It's all interrelated. It is a combination of control measures. Over to you, Odette.
I think for me, it's important what Anika and Tanusha says, but also just thinking about PPE, and a lot of the focus is on PPE, but please remember it is in a whole context of the hierarchy of controls, looking at engineering controls, opening windows, doing simple things. Opening windows, improving the ventilation, and also training of our workers to recognize the symptoms early, isolate, stay at home when they need to stay at home to prevent infection in the workplace.
And then finally, my colleague Bunyadizwa, that's a mispronunciation, Muvali, my tongue is still slipping, please.
I think the take-home message from me is that hand washing is very important. Although hand sanitizing is just as important, but it should never overtake the importance of hand washing. And we should keep on preaching that it's really, really important.
It is almost the kind of primary activity we need to engage in, especially where hand sanitizer might be in short supply. And while you're waiting for some hand sanitizer supply to eventually get back to you in your workplaces, please ensure that hand washing, social distancing, and ensuring that we put all those basic elements in place is highly critical. At this point, I want to thank the complete team that contributed, and I'll start with the technical people behind the cameras, behind the laptops, on the other side of the camera that we're facing now. And on my extreme left is Guy, who's operating our video camera. Thank you very much for his contribution. Glenn on the laptop, solving all of our issues there when things don't work so well or technology doesn't help us. And Tabani, his colleague, who's assisted with that. Who's not on screen, for example, are our two colleagues from security and the cleaner. The cleaner was the first colleague, Lindo Komalo. Lindo, thank you very much for your contribution. We certainly rely on your services for us here at the NIH, and we appreciate this teamwork that has developed amongst us as staff. And our other colleague, Zamani Mia, who was a security, who demonstrated for us as well the hand sanitizer component under the good tutelage of Ms. Muvali here. But from the top, for myself, Ashraf Raycliffe, the National Occupational Safety Training Manager, our Head of Immunology and Microbiology, Dr. Tanisha Singh, on her right-hand side, your left-hand side, Ms. Anika Matuka, Immunology and Microbiology section, and then in the middle, Dr. Odette Walmik from the Occupational Medicine section, and then finally, Bunyadziwa Muvali, I got it right that time, from the Immunology and Microbiology section. We say thank you to all of you to have logged on to Zoom. We will have future Zoom sessions. These recordings might be slightly edited and placed onto the website, and I think our YouTube channel, our email address is info@nih.ac.za. If Glenn could just put that slide up with all the resources and contact details. And we have a hotline that, the second hotline that we're setting up, that will also be ready for and staffed for you to contact. In the meantime, don't forget the NICD's hotline, the National Department of Health's WhatsApp chat service, which you can look at the number and send them a hi, they'll put you onto the system. And there's obviously the NICD website as well, and the World Health Organization. You'll see the screen there. This will be, if you can take a quick snapshot of it with your cell phone or screen grab on your laptop, we will certainly include this in our slides and presentations that we're sending to you as well. I need to say thank you very much for your participation. Please ensure that our security officers and our cleaning staff in our workplaces, particularly the health setting environments, is now informed after the session. We bid you good farewell and see you in our next edition of the NIOH COVID-19 Outbreak Response Team's online Zoom session. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashraf.